on page 54, Derrida continues to talk about Parergon and Ergon. It seems to be reductionist if one just says, well, Ergon and Parergon are just an old binary dichotomy. But Derrida goes much further, as he writes, philosophical discourse will always have been against the Parergon. But what about this against? The Parergon comes against, beside, and in addition to the Ergon, the work done, the fact, the work. But it does not fall to one side. It touches and cooperates within the operation, from a certain outside, neither simply outside nor simply inside, like an accessory that one is obliged to welcome on the border, on board. It is first of all the on border. If you wanted to play a little, for the sake of poetics, at etymology, the aboard should refer us to the Middle High German bort, table, plank, deck of a vessel. The board is thus, properly speaking, a plank, and etymology allows us to grasp the way its meanings link together. The primary meaning is the deck of a vessel. For example, a construction made of planks. Then, by autonomy, that which borders, that which encloses, that which limits, that which is at the extremity, says Litra. Can you elaborate on this?
Essentially, Derrida is still trying to argue rather than define the difference between Parergon and Ergon, which is something very important in Kant's aesthetics. Because the idea is that in the binary system, there is always a hierarchical order. So there is a more important than less important. So in this case, Ergon is the main subject, whereas the Parergon is the secondary. So that goes to painting. So we always say a painting is the subject, where the frame is secondary and is supportive. So however, if you look at the idea of the border, as Derrida trying to go back to the earlier meaning of those words, how people first used those words. And, as far as German in the earlier days, border not really means a border rather than a plank. That means a piece of wood. And if it's a piece of wood, and this piece of wood itself become ergon instead of Parergon, because Parergon is supposed to be bordering thing, like a frame. But if it's a piece of plank, that becomes a little problematic. Your first response to the idea of plank is a piece of wood. A piece of wood cannot be a frame, because a frame is supposed to be bordering something else. So a plank obviously cannot be bordering something else. However, if you put something in the center of a plank, that becomes something else. So the point here is that language becomes something very unstable. And we always say, give me the precise definition. But the question again, do we ever give people precise definition of things? Or can we articulate everything we say with a definition? Obviously, we can't. And that's what Derrida's argument here. Then if you look at, let's say, the Renaissance things, or you could go a little earlier, and you think about it. Most of those things were in the church. And you could have a small painting in the middle, but a huge frame outside. Those frames often are decorated with precious stones, gilt, gold, and inlaid silver. So now, you look at this thing. Somebody paints a thing. You put it in such an elaborate frame. And not only the decorations, then you look at the inscriptions. Most of those things have inscriptions. And sometimes not just a tag to say what's the name of this work or who did it. They have a whole section of inscriptions that goes both sides all the way around the frame. You begin to ask yourself, is there such thing as Ergon that dominates Parergon? But if you look at this way, then you begin to wonder if the whole idea of Kant, or Kant's idea that Ergon, the main structure or the painting in the structure, or Parergon means the columns of the architecture. Then the columns are not important as the structure of architecture. Or at least you think the roof and the gate may be more important. Building is your focus. But there is a simple question. Can this structure sustain itself without columns? Now we're completely in contradiction here. Derrida is trying to go as deep as possible to dig out the contradiction of German idealism. So that's why he's going with line by line and word by word, trying to guide you into these deep woods. And slowly you'll figure out.
On page 55, Derrida writes, "Now Kant does use the word paragon elsewhere. The context is very different, but the structure is analogous and just as problematical. It is to be found in a very long note added to the second edition of Religion within the limits of reason alone. This place, the form of this place, is of great import. Now what is the paragon? It is the concept of the remark of this general remark. Kant defines the status of the remark as paragon. This general remark is the first of 4 which have been added to each piece of this text, and which might have as titles 1. Of the effects of grace, 2. Of miracles, 3. Of mysteries, 4. Of the means of grace. Because the dogmatic faith which declares that it knows seems to it presumptuous and not very sincere, for to remove difficulties with regard to what is in itself, in practical terms, well established is only a secondary task, paragon, when those difficulties concern transcendent questions." Is Derrida talking here about how paragon relates to relics?
Derrida's argument here to the religious view of things. As the Western tradition, everything is based on the hierarchical order, the binary order. The entire trick here is not the balance, rather than the hierarchical conclusion. Even in the religious view, you have the main icon or the main principle of the religious idea. But then you have those supporting things. Those things are relatively secondary or trivial, such as the relics. So the question again, do the relics become secondary? Since the abstract idea we can't really define. We got into this situation that every possible way we go, we're sort of heading against the wall. None of that really makes any perfect sense. And from the trivial or tedious textual linguistic view, or rather you might say philosophical view, you look at every possible way, seems to be always stuck into an undefinable situation. Derrida's point becomes more clear now. If the beauty, a naked statue, that is the ergon and its base and all the supporting parts, including decorative pieces, the draperies, the clothing, whatever. And those supposed to be Parergon. And again, it's the same question. If this absolute beauty is without the Parergon, what that's going to be? The question here is this. When we are brought to this view, we begin to wonder, well, that makes sense because I have never thought about it. So why I have not thought about it? You think about it, you go to a museum and you see a great piece of art. The art is represented, or rather presented into such a way that you have the lighting, you have the painted wall, then you have a clean floor, and then you have a frame or structures supporting, then you have the piece either on top of that or in front of that or in the center of Parergon, the secondary. Then do we ever see a great piece stands there alone without any Parergon? We don't see that. You only see that it's in the warehouse. Even in the warehouse, Parergon still attached to the ergon. You can never detach those two things. As far as any time as a representation or as a presentation to the public, to the viewer, you cannot divide these two parts. But in our deep mind, we always think it's divided because the work is more important. Everything else is secondary. But in reality, every time you put it into a presentation, and you cannot do it without the secondary, which is the Parergon. And we never question ourselves about that because we were told that's how you think about things, not necessarily how you look at things. Because you don't look at things first, rather you think things first. When you think things first, that means you already pre-programmed. So you're told to look at things this way instead of that way. So we may say that's a cultural education or that's artistic education. Without that education, we can't do it. Think about this. You get a guy from deep woods, Africa, or Pacific Island. You drop him in the middle of, let's say, the New York Metropolitan Museum. So what do you think he's going to do? Besides, he's going to try to do some destruction, and he will be very shocked or amazed, right? Let's put it that way. Do you really think he's going to have any sense to make the difference between the ergon and the parergon? Well, again, you don't have to go that far. You take your little kid, 3-year-old, you put him in front of Da Vinci. I can guarantee you the kid will be more obsessed with the frame than the painting. That's the fact. We'll know that. So now why kids do that? Because they see what they see. They have no artistic education, so say. But the question is, the artistic education we have received, is that something as a good thing? Or is it a correct thing that we have? I mean, that's Derrida's question. So can we look at the things without any prejudice? Oh, that's the question. In this case, we can't because we already are pre-programmed. That's the point here. After Kant's philosophy for the last couple hundred years, we've all been brainwashed. So we always have an agenda. We go somewhere, we're looking for what we understand. We might translate it into, I am looking for something I like or something I understand. The question is, where did your liking and understanding come from? And of course, we never ask that question. We say, well, because that's mine. Really? That's yours? So that's where everything becomes problematic. If you look at it this way, and then you look at art, philosophy, religion, pretty much everything in life, and everything becomes problematic. Well, that's why Derrida called his system deconstruction. Of course, not destruction, because if it's a destruction, you just say, oh, this is bad, this is all bad, forget it. Like the guy made his comment, oh, that's like take an engine to apart and then put it together. I think that guy's almost like genius. I mean, that's exactly what it's going on. But with a sophisticated philosophical view, this engine, it's very hard to take apart. It's harder to put it back together. That's the problem. That's what they call the deconstruction. So everything that Derrida demonstrates here in this book is in a very detailed manner to make you understand things from the very basic. That's what he's trying to do.
From page 56 to 57, Derrida seems to be making strong statements against Kant. The Parergon inscribes something which comes as an exterior to the proper field. Here, that of pure reason and of religion within the limits of reason alone. Because reason is conscious of its impotence to satisfy its moral need, it has recourse to the Parergon, to grace, to mystery, to miracles. It needs the supplementary work. Hors d'oeuvres, then, the clothes of statues, which both decorate and veil their nudity. What is represented in the representation would be the naked and natural body. The representative essence of the statue would be related to this, and the only beautiful thing in the statue would be that representation. It alone would be essentially, purely, and intrinsically beautiful, the proper object of a pure judgment of taste. Would any garment be a Parergon, G-strings, and the like? What to do with the absolutely transparent veils? And how to transpose the statement to painting? For example, Cranach's Lucretia holds only a light band of transparent veil in front of her sex. Where is the Parergon? Should one regard as the Parergon the dagger, which is not part of her naked and natural body, and whose point she holds turned toward herself, touching her skin? In that case, only the point of the Parergon would touch her body, in the middle of a triangle formed by her two breasts and her navel.
Derrida strongly challenging Kant with some really simple facts in front of your own eyes. I mean, you think about all these religious paintings, particularly earlier ones. You have a naked man or woman, and you have some garment, some veil floating around. And you begin to wonder, well, because of the religious purpose or for the ethical purpose. So we have to cover those human privates. But the question again, Is that really the purpose we're doing that? Or are we trying to cover the body's private parts? Or are we trying to stir our desire to focus on those parts? Now that becomes a question. We're trying to focus on those parts for whatever the purpose. And then because of the veil, the garment, that helps us to go our way. If that's the case, then the veil becomes something more important. It's not necessarily Parergon. So the same way, if the columns of a building are a Parergon, if the window is a Parergon, what is the purpose? Now we begin to look at a house, and sometimes we like a building only because we like the columns. For our common daily experience, you like the house because you like the window, not because you like the roof, unless you like the wall, or more or less you're going to like the structure of the house or style. You only like the window. If the window becomes Parergon, what do you like this house about? Then you tell people, I like the window. Now, you like a Parergon. So then what about the Ergon? Well, at this point, you say, well, the house is fine, but my favorite still is the window. So then everything switched now. The window becomes Ergon, and the entire house becomes Parergon. But Kant tries very hard to convince us with his aesthetic principles that you can never emphasize the Parergon. You always have to emphasize the Ergon. And not only that, you have to be in a position, detach your intellectual and emotional functions or experiences in order to get to the point that you have the pure judgment, the pure taste, so you can understand or rather experience the beauty. If that's the case, then everything seems to be going far away or falling apart. Nothing really holds together anymore.